I'll be back with the whole fire department.
Get off my plane.
One of the classic wonders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly less well known is this. Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
I love Zorro.
It's not violence, but you know there is death in that one. I'm just relative to my selection of clips.
It's always dark.
It is true. It's most of the time.
And then there was Light, and then there was Hi, I'm Mark.
And I'm Tom.
And we are
the Cinemaniacs.
So we have a lot of films.
Boy, did I pay my dues for you people, and you bastards didn't even join me in it this week. Holy cow, we'll be talking about it, but I was not happy.
Let me counter that with, I saw what for me was the best movie of the year this year.
I did too, as a matter of fact, and I bet it's the same one.
It might not star John Cena. Or it might. Would you care to begin, since I didn't see this first
I
film?
guess. Yeah, okay, let's just get on with it. John Cena plays a parent along with, he's apparently a parent. That's about the only funny thing that happened in this movie. Anyway, he's one of three groups of parents that have to try to keep their teenage daughters from having sex on the prom. This is a real high-concept film. Unfortunately, Orson Welles couldn't get to it before he died. And so, you know, you can't be having sex out there, so you could call them blockers. That's about all you need to know.
Well, you know, I didn't see this.
Yeah.
And let's say the euphemism on the show for me not wanting to see something is, I didn't have time. If that's your big joke,
yeah,
something going in to around somebody's butt is your big joke, I don't know if I need that movie.
That's clearly the level. I mean, I don't get John Cena. You know, he's a wrestler and all that. And
He may be a very nice guy.
Possibly. And I would say that to his face because he'd beat the heck out of me.
And you'd call him sir.
Absolutely. But you know, he's been playing bit roles, and he's certainly got a larger role in this one. This may be testing the waters to see if he can hold his own in an entire film as a lead or something like that. But I just didn't think this was funny. To be honest, I saw this at a Friday evening show, the second screening, so it wasn't the first one. It was about half filled with people younger than I, shall I say. And they seemed to be having a good time, finding it amusing. It was you know, searching for stuff to say. It was well shot, but that tells you, and go online if you're looking to really see what it's about and find the red band R-rated version of it, because that's really what it is. Oh, isn't it funny that they say the F word all the time and the S word, and you're seeing all the, it's, I was not looking forward to Blockers. So granted, I went into it expecting garbage. And as you know, sometimes you go in there and this is, I'm going to pay my dues, and you're happily you know, surprised. This was not the case.
Should we talk about a film that we both did see?
But don't say a whole lot, quietly. Oops.
I'm going to make the guys in the booth really unhappy because this is the level I want to speak at. And then I'm going to talk really loud. Up next, we have a film. This aspect of this film is interesting. The rest, not interesting at all. Co-written and directed by John, I'm going to mangle his last name, Krasinski, who you would know as the nice guy from The American Office. It comes a thriller, horror movie, actually. People are in a situation where something is out there that is going to kill them very violently and painfully unless they maintain silence and find themselves a quiet place.
So you've got to be quiet. Your characters have to be quiet. The trailer is very reflective of that. I went into this thinking, 90-minute movie, how can you do this? And so that was one of the things I was really looking forward to see how they answered it.
So basically the story, because, okay, this show gets put on YouTube. On YouTube, we have to take the trailers out
Right.
so that we can have a show on YouTube. So occasionally we will reiterate the plot. John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, who's his wife in real life.
I really believed them that they were married.
Yeah, they sold that well. And they're a small family of a couple children. They live in a remote area, and something has happened. We're living in a world where society has broken down.
It's in medias res, too.
And
Who knows?
We're tossed into this, and it eloquently, without, so a few newspaper headlines here and there and visuals tells you that something has wiped out a lot of the population, and if you make a noise, it's going to get you. So there are all these very clever and interesting and very simply shown ways that these people minimize having sound anywhere. As the story progresses, there are certain inevitabilities that you are presented with where there's going to be some sound coming up, and how are they going to deal with having to go through certain things without making any noise? This film is insanely tense, like almost out of the gate. Even before they explain why, everybody's being quiet and everybody's being very careful to not make a noise, so you know there's a reason for this. When they show you what the reason is, you're like, okay, this film means very serious business. And it's, there's very little noise. When there is a loud noise, everybody's on edge because, oh my God, there are consequences for this. How will they avoid that?
Well, and just to interject, I felt bad because every now and then I would have to cough in the middle of the movie, and I'm like, oh my, and I was ultimately so impressed. I'll let you continue.
No, please.
But I was so impressed with this movie, and it made such an impact on me. Like for hours afterwards, I felt like I was in that environment.
It so draws you into that. It makes the audience a participant with the characters on screen too, not wanting to make a noise. Now, I was really uptight before going to see this because I knew what it was about vaguely. I didn't know what the threat was specifically, but I knew that you couldn't make a noise. And I'm like, okay, no offense to Keene Cinemas. I like Keene Cinemas. But due to the construction of that theater, there is sometimes bleed through.
Right.
So I actually contacted Chad, and I'm like, have you thought about what you're putting next to Quiet Place? And he said he did, and that worked out great. So then my next thing was, what's the audience going to be like? Because I'm going to go see this on an opening night, on a weeknight, and if you have people who are there to be goofy or talk, it's going to break the illusion. So this is a double-edged sword here, because I think the best place to see this is in a theater, because in a theater ideally, you don't have the distractions of home. When you're at home, if I'm looking at my TV at home, my eye might wander off to those discs on the shelf, or it might wander to my environment, or the phone might ring, or in the theater it can too. Or I might have to go to the bathroom. I might want to get something to eat, blah, blah, blah. In a theater, ideally, it's you and it's the movie and the people you're watching it with. So if everybody in the theater can shut up and not make a lot of noise, it's great because, again, the audience I was real nervous. It was a hometown audience, and they were chatty before the movie and through the previews. I'm like, oh, this is going to be terrible. Everybody shut up. It was because this movie grabs you by the lapels and says, silence has consequences. Sound has consequences. So I'm watching it, and the only time anybody made a noise was when one of the big things happens that sort of spikes the tension or releases the tension, and people just couldn't contain themselves because this movie keeps tightening the screw until you realize at times you're not breathing because you're so like one with the characters in the movie that you don't want to, as you said, make a noise. So this was so well done. Interesting that execution-wise, it almost is like an art house movie.
Yes.
It's a horror movie, but it is so artistically done and so beautifully shot, and the acting is so good. It rises above the level of, and honestly, this is a monster movie.
Yep.
And it's a tension-filled, masterfully done tension-filled monster movie. I could go on, but I'd just be repeating myself. This is the best movie I've seen this year. This is the best horror movie I've seen, for my taste, probably since It Follows. People say Get Out, which was really good too, but for me, It Follows was the last horror movie that really shook me up a lot.
Okay.
This is a movie I want to go back and see again with people who haven't seen it yet, just so I can watch their reaction to it. So the key is see it in a theater, and I out of the benevolence of my heart, I wish for you to have an audience that is very quiet while you see it in the theater so they don't ruin it.
Right, I'll agree. As I was watching this, I was thinking, and it ultimately culminated to this as well, that this was the smartest movie I've seen in probably a decade.
With no dialogue in it.
Absolutely.
You know?
Maybe that's it. Don't write stupid dialogue.
Well, there's that too.
But there is dialogue in it, and it's very clever the way they do that and explain it. It's even plant and payoff. You have a scene where they're talking with dialogue, and that comes back later on to explain.
And it's not obvious. A lot of movies do that, and you're like, okay, this is going to get used again
It's really
later.
a smart film. As I was watching it, I was just bowled over by it. I had, and this isn't going to give anything away. It's clearly like post-apocalyptic. Krasinski is on the shortwave band trying to find anybody else alive. And so my only real complaint is why do they have electricity? So I don't mean to be a pain. I have other questions afterwards. Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? But this was in retrospect. As I was watching this, I was riveted. I was just bowled over by it and thought that this was just A Quiet Place was just a terrific film.
The tension was so well done. I was giggling at times because it made me so happy. I'm like, this movie is working so
Yeah.
well. I was giddy.
And you're right. I will be interested to see what it's like on home screen.
I mean,
even though we've got big screens and everything,
right.
I think it'll be different.
If you can tune out the distractions of home, it'll play theoretically better at home because you can. If you're watching it at home alone, nobody's going to make noise but you,
Right.
screaming and being traumatized for life. So speaking of traumatized for life,
It can be tough, and many of them were, even many of us were. Following the tragic lives of all of the Kennedys, everything happens to this seemingly cursed family. Well, one of the younger ones and one of the remaining ones, Ted Kennedy, has a problem. If you're going to run, if you're a senator and a popular senator, and you're thinking about running for president, you better be careful as you're driving around a little lake called Chappaquiddick.
To equal the crisp, delicious flavor of hot popcorn that's bathed in real melted butter.
So this was a strange film. Obviously, I mean, you can't be probably be making this while Kennedy's still alive. So we lost him several years ago. I forget how far long ago it is. And so this came out. I don't know the backstory of the people who wrote it or anything. I'm sitting there. I grew up during this. Now, granted, I was young, but I was certainly aware of it. And the one thing that I thought was, at the time, I recall Kennedy pretty much being villainized for this. And maybe this was partisan, I'm not quite sure. But a lot of really primarily negative stuff about him. This film doesn't do that. Performances are fine. This is really well made. I was particularly surprised. We've got two comedians in this.
An odd choice.
Yes, an odd choice. Both of them are very good. But I was basically left with why. It seemed to me that this was a retelling of the situation, but usually, I mean, I'm always telling my students, and my feeling is that art has a point, and our job as audiences, or the reason we go to it, is to agree or disagree with it. And in my opinion, this just kind of said, well, we've done a lot of investigation, and how they got some of the information in these very secluded moments, I'm not sure, and so I tended to disbelieve that. But ultimately, it just seemed to me to be a retelling of it, and I was left with it, so what?
For me, I'd always known about this incident. You know, growing up where we are here in New Hampshire, New England, we get the Boston TV stations.
Sure.
So you would always hear this referred to. And again, my impression of this was always Ted Kennedy was a bad guy, and he was, you know, a drunken, rich, affluent playboy who callously caused the death of a woman. But I never knew anything beyond that. So going into this movie, I knew that a car went off a bridge, a girl died, the guy did not. So for me, this was interesting because I never had heard the story.
Okay.
Now, what research I've done after seeing the movie, I read an article that was written, that was the first investigative piece written about this, and then some other things, and an interview with the two screenwriters. It is based as much on fact as possible. Now, anytime you see Kennedy and Chappaquiddick alone, well, that's, neither of those people are around to tell that story,
Right.
one of which never had the opportunity to tell that story. So basically what this movie is about is fairly early on in the movie, you see Ted Kennedy and Mary Jo Chappaquiddick in a car driving at night. It goes off a bridge. He escapes. She does not. And the movie is about how he and his handlers deal with this. How is the public going to find out? What are we going to tell the public about it? Kennedy is set up to be, you know, it's destiny and inevitable that he will be president. And that's what everybody, maybe except Ted Kennedy, wants for Ted Kennedy. Is for him to be prevalent. Joe Kennedy is a big part of this. Bruce Stern as
Right.
Joe Kennedy. And so a lot of this movie is, I was thinking about this when I was watching. It's about shadows. It's about Ted Kennedy living in the shadow of his two dead brothers who are great men in the eyes of the world, in the shadow of his father who wants greatness for him, and some other people. The Ed Helms character, he's like an adopted cousin of the Kennedy family who lives in their shadow. And people point that out too. He's like, yeah, you have a different last name,
And he's
right?
not happy about that.
Yeah, you're adopted, right?
Right,
He's
yeah.
trying to get a little shine off that. So I thought this was really well done for, as I said when we were watching the trailer, I'm watching this in the theater pretty much sight unseen, well, obviously, but I didn't know anything about it. These studio names come up that I've never heard of. I'm like, oh, is this going to be some cheap kind of thing. You know, Byron Allen, nothing against Byron Allen, but I remember him as the guy from Real People who's now, you know, producing movies and buying the Weather Channel and stuff. Very well shot, well scored, performances are great, well edited. Jason Clarke is an Australian guy who's been in a ton of stuff. When I saw his casting for this, I'm like, ooh, I don't know how that well it's going to work. But there are times and angles where I thought, wow, he looks a lot like him, when he really kind of doesn't in real life. They don't paint Kennedy to be a hero or villain necessarily. He is both.
Right.
The pendulum swings into both categories for him in this movie. He does certain things that you think are pretty despicable, and certain things that you think are, well, that's what, you know, I would do in that situation. It's really, really interesting. I would say I'm curious what somebody who lived through it would think about it, but I can see if this is based mostly upon facts that are out there, then you're just saying, well, yeah, I already knew this, and now I just saw it in a movie.
Right.
For me, it was information. Maybe you want to read a little bit more about it, actually, because there are certain things that, as you say, nobody could have known this,
right.
or we have to base it on what Kennedy and the Kennedy team told everybody. And some of those things were pretty shady. Having two comedians play Kennedy's right and left-hand men was interesting, because there were times in this movie that I was watching it and I'm like, wow, you know, with a sound effect or a little music or a laugh track, this would play as comedy. Because Ed Helms often plays the frustrated guy.
Right.
So he does that in the movie dramatically, but you're so used to seeing him do that as comedy, it's kind of interesting. And Gaffigan, too, he's the straight-faced guy.
Right.
So there are moments where Kennedy does something and they both kind of want to slap their foreheads, or, you know, Joe Kennedy brings in all of his Washington advisors to help, you know, spin this thing and save his potential eventual presidency. And Ted Kennedy's like, well, I just did this. And everybody they cut to the guys in the room and they're like, oh.
Yeah, right.
And you think you want to hear like the sound of a record scratching or something like that. So I thought Chappaquiddick was really good.
I thought it was extremely well made.
It makes me want to read more about this incident to see if there are other, I'm sure it's a Kennedy. Of course there are theories and stuff like that. That is all we saw in the theater.
Yep.
Well, it's all that we're going to talk about that we saw in the theater this weekend. We'd like to thank our friends at the Latches Theater in Brattleboro, Vermont for sponsoring our show. And we will now move on to home video, that which you watch in the comfort of your own home on the platform, service, device, or format of your choice. The first of which is a film involving
Scary stuff, kids.
scary stuff that you may or may not have investigated on your own.
That's possible.
And is it my turn?
It is
my
your turn.
That's why the camera's on me. See the guys, they know what's going on. So we have the latest and possibly final, not if it makes money, chapter in the series of films about paranormal investigations into the great beyond, which threatens to cross over into our world and cause all kinds of financial and real estate ruins. This time, Lin Shaye is back as the investigator who has been in several of these movies. This one is no exception. It is entitled Insidious, The Last Key.
You can reach it quickly, comfortably, and with utmost economy.
Supposedly scary stuff. What I've always respected about the Insidious movies is they're PG-13, and up until now, I thought they were pretty smart, particularly the first couple, and really pretty scary for a PG-13 movie. I've always liked her. I thought she was, and she remains good in this one, but I think the premise is getting really worn. The filmmakers here have fallen in love with these two Abbott and Costello investigators, that they just play up this stupid comedy bit with them, and I got really annoyed with them, and I'm hoping Insidious is the last key.
I saw the first Insidious, and I liked it.
Right.
And then I think I missed it's my involvement.
You don't really have to see any of them.
My involvement with
others.
this series has been a stone skipping across the pond of the
Right.
Insidious universe. So I've seen a couple of them here and there. This one was, I don't know. The atmosphere works when they're doing it. Basically, it's the Lin Shaye character going back to her childhood home where she suffered trauma and where it all began, which every film series, when they run out of steam, goes backwards rather than forwards. And so there are the ghostly apparitions, which I didn't ever find really scary. Too many jump scares, which aren't legit to me. They're just a physical reaction. There were moments where the tension was pretty well done, but then ultimately you just know something's going to say boo, and then it's going to cut away. So I didn't really care about this. While watching it in the theater, though, I was like, I'm looking at two 60-plus-year-old people on screen having a conversation, and so I'm surrounded by teenagers. So that does say something that this film series, wisdom is that kids only want to watch kids on screen. Like, no, this is a movie about an old lady. She's talking to her brother.
I think it's the strength of her performance. She's always good and riveting.
She's good, and the movies are, for what a modern horror audience wants, they deliver. So I would say if you liked the other ones, I don't imagine you wouldn't like this one.
Right.
If you like more of the same, that's what this gives you.
Mm-hmm.
And it. I don't want to say too much about what the story does structurally because there's a surprise at the end, which I guess probably isn't a surprise if you've seen the other films.
Right. Yeah.
But when it did that, I'm like, it felt very cheap and pandering to me. It's like, let's take the biggest scare of this series and try to milk that for a little bit more again.
Fair enough.
Which I thought was cheesy. So I didn't really care for Insidious: The Last Key.
Right.
And if they make more, maybe I won't have time to see them. Maybe I will.
Maybe you won't have time to see them as well. Speaking of milking things for all they're worth, you may have seen something like this before. I certainly have. But Ed Helms, strangely enough, is back in this show, along with Owen Wilson, playing a couple of brothers who, all along, they've thought they knew their family. But strangely enough, they did not when their mother, Glenn Close, explains that, well, we're not exactly sure about your lineage relative to your father. They all have to go out and try to find them down, track them down between a group of 4 rather disparate people, because they're really looking for their father figures.
They've left their fields and barns. They're marching from the farms because kids don't drink enough milk.
So loads of fun. I know I've seen this, and I remember liking it. I was a little off-put. You wouldn't believe the amount of editing I had to do on that trailer just to get it so that you folks could see it without having your little ears offended by all of the F words and other things. But so I was surprised. I don't take offense at the language, but I don't think it's clever. I don't think you have to work too hard to throw an F-bomb or talk about feces and things like that. And so I thought this film ultimately, I don't remember seeing it in the theaters where I was.
It made that much of an impression.
Right, exactly. Usually I can. I mean, I know I saw it and I enjoyed it primarily because I like all the actors in it. It's fun to see them. They look like they're having a good time. Is this anything? I think on video, if you like many of the actors in it, it's for want of a better term, inoffensive enough. Just realize it's rated R for sexual situations and lots of dialogue. So I wasn't crazy about father figures. You can take it or leave it.
Speaking of nature documentaries.
Indeed.
Up next, we have a film that is a documentary that traces the life and work of a pretty well-known. You think of people who do the kind of work this woman does, not household names, but this is somebody who managed to do that. A woman who devoted her life to studying chimpanzees in the forests of the world. Last name Goodall, first name Jane.
Me, Mark. You, Jane.
Show starts in 8 minutes. Yum, yum.
So, National Geographic footage and special and everything, and how long has she been doing this? I thought I was really impressed with, the breadth of her work and how she's devoted her entire life to this. It seemed it always seemed to me to be kind of a strange topic, spending your life with the apes. But, Cousteau spent his life with the ocean, and there are lots of other, scientists who follow those kinds of things. And as you say, she's become certainly one of the most recognized. I thought the footage was pretty spectacular, and it was an interesting look at her personal life.
The footage looks good. I was saying off air, I'm so impressed by old footage that can be made to look like it was shot yesterday. It's just like proper care and restoration. You didn't always see that. And more at the end of Chappaquiddick, there are scenes that were shot for, I'm sure, the Boston ABC affiliate saying, would you vote for this guy? And it looked like it was shot yesterday. Like at first I'm like, did they fake this? I'm like, no, this is authentic. It looks so good. And the clips in this look gorgeous. So shots of, that alone, which is a very strange reason for me to want to watch the documentary. I would watch that. And I like chimps, even though they can and do rip people's faces off.
That's true.
Speaking of ripping people's things off.
Oh, yes. That's not a bad one.
It's actually true.
We can find out young and innocent and just doesn't fit in. He has a difficult time. Serial killers tend to as they're growing up. But we're going to find a different approach, a different look at one of those wonderful little guys as a group of kids talk, and one of them in particular can talk about my friend Dahmer.
3 completely new kinds of Ford cars for 1960.
Ooh.
This movie's creepy.
Yes, it is.
Based, obviously, on a true story. This was based on a graphic novel written by a guy who you saw in the trailer. He was a friend, I guess you would say, of the young Jeffrey Dahmer in high school. And, yeah, my friend Dahmer. And basically, the scenario is that Dahmer was an outcast. He was an odd guy until he started acting up and acting goofy. Acting, making fun of the handicapped, you might say, or whatever. And because he had the guts to do that and act out in class, a small group of people said, man, this guy's our mascot. We like him for that reason, and because they would get him to do goofy things. So the graphic novel is very short and sweet and simple. And I actually read it after seeing this movie. We're currently located in the basement of our town's public library. And I was sitting here working late one night, and I'm like, I wonder if they have that. And I looked it up on the computer. They did. I went upstairs, I got it, and I read it. So the film is very close to the book. It expands on other things. I would say if you like the movie, find the graphic novel because it fills in some gaps. It has some hindsight that the film doesn't allow itself to do. You have the guy writing about this incident looking back, and he'd say, it wasn't until later we realized, well, this movie doesn't do this. This movie goes linear. And you join Dahmer at some year of high school, and as he becomes befriended by this group of people, and you see his home life, and you can't say you saw the things that made him become a serial killer, because bad wiring makes you become a serial killer. But you certainly see manifestations that there was trouble that nobody was picking up on, and his bad home life didn't help him not become a serial killer.
Right.
So the movie is not graphic. You don't see any of the crimes he ultimately would commit. You see him do weird things that aren't too cool, and you see some insinuations, but knowing where he's going to go in life makes every little thing that much creepier, because you're like, oh, if somebody had done this, maybe that wouldn't have happened, or whatever. Performances are really good.
Performances are real strong. Yeah.
Ross Lynch, who I'd never heard of, apparently is known as a Disney kid, like he was on one of those Disney Channel shows. So for him to play this really serious, dour guy is a stretch. So there's acting involved there. It's kind of touching off and on. It's a good coming-of-age movie. It's set in the late 70s, so it's got a really good soundtrack. As I like to say, it's got a T-Rex song in it, so automatically it won me over a little bit, one that you never hear. And then at the end, it gets pretty dark. There's a moment at the end where something almost happens, and I was like, my blood ran cold. You're like, oh, God, here it comes.
Yep.
So I thought this was really good. This was an indie movie. It didn't get a lot of theatrical play, but it was, for me, one of the best things I think I saw last year, because it really did disturb me and move me in a way.
Speaking of disturbances, then.
Yes. Oh.
All yours.
Back to me. Speaking of disturbances, this is the Arrow Video Corner. So we are going to talk about a couple of films that Arrow Video put out recently, and that's fun. Oh!
Almost.
You almost got it in the face. That's great. That's different. I mean, not that I want you to get shot in the face with an Arrow Video logo. So first up, okay. This is a slam dunk for me, okay? The way I would not be saying something good about this is if they had it like upside down backwards in Dutch. So it's a ringer. We have a film from 1975 directed by Dario Argento, Italian master of the macabre. It stars David Hemmings and Daria Nicolodi. Hemmings plays an American jazz pianist, living in Italy, who witnesses a murder, he thinks, and goes on to investigate these things that keep getting at his brain that he can't quite figure out. Will he find the murderer, or will the murderer find him first? In a little film entitled Deep Red.
Any place to eat?
Are you getting hungry?
I'm starved.
And we're back.
Oh, hi. Sorry. Just planning what we're going to do for the rest of the show. I was thinking about just knocking off for the rest of it. So, a favorite film of mine. Mm-hmm. So, when I saw this was getting the Arrow treatment, the first thing I did was smile. The second thing I did was I went and I took the old Blue Underground DVD off my shelf and I sold it, because I'm like, I don't need this anymore, because Arrow's going to do it. So, new 4K restoration. Not a 4K disc, but it's a Blu-ray, so it looks fantastic. I had the ability to see this restoration in the theater recently, and it looks gorgeous. It doesn't look like an old movie. This is a multi-disc. I don't have the whole package yet. It's actually being released tomorrow, and I'm like going to go buy it tomorrow because I want all the goodies. It comes with posters and lobby cards and all kinds of stuff. But on one disc is the full-length international version of the film, which is not what people here saw until the DVDs came out. So it's about 110 minutes, I think. The second disc is the US edit, which removes all the comedy. There's a lot of interplay between Nickelodeon and Hemmings, almost like a His Gal Friday kind of thing. Like she's a spunky reporter, women's lib reporter. He's kind of a chauvinistic male type of the 70s, and they butt heads, and it's a fun interplay. Most of that was lost for the American version. You get less time spent with the victims before they die in the American version. So, having always known the American version, when I watch the international, it's like I'm getting little treats because it's not material that I know as well. And it also seems odd how funny the movie is at times because the American cut took that all out. But basically the story is the standard Argento storyline. Somebody happens upon a murder happening. They see just enough to not be sure what they saw. And the rest of the movie is them trying to investigate and find the murderer before the murderer finds them and replaying the scene over and over again in their head, trying to make sense of it all. And eventually sense is made. So it is very violent at times, which is what Argento was known for. The soundtrack I love the soundtrack to this movie. It's Goblin and Giorgio Gasolini, I believe. It's a mix of this composer and this prog rock band, and it's fantastic. I mean, this is a crank it up soundtrack. Cinematography is very interesting. Argento was big on camera tricks and the camera like being mounted to the knife as it goes down on somebody, or just strange macro lens stuff. So it looks great, very widescreen. The disc is loaded with extras. I think the American cut, I think, just has like a couple trailers on it, but the first disc with the Italian version, there's at least one commentary, new making of bonus features, making of and featurette items from previous editions. I didn't have time to get through it all, and I've had this disc for 2 weeks. It is loaded with stuff, so don't be afraid that this new edition skimps on the old stuff. It is a thriller. This was a movie that was always shelved in the horror section, and I guess you'd call it that because the murders are pretty violent, but it's Hitchcocky kind of thriller, like that was Argento's thing up into Suspiria before he got really kind of fantastical and weird for a while, before he calmed down and started making these kind of movies again. So if you like Deep Red, I would say buy this because it's the best this has ever looked, and it's got great extras, and the packaging is phenomenal. If you've never seen Deep Red, I would say try to see this because the movie is really good, and I don't think it's very well known here. I think Suspiria really is the only one that anybody outside of like genre fans and Italian horror fans knows very well. But this one to me is like, Suspiria I love because it's so crazy and the soundtrack is so good and it's so pretty, but this might arguably be a better made movie. But this is like number 2 for him, for me, and he's like one of my favorite directors. So there's that. Speaking of movies that Arrow released, I'm segueing to myself again. We have another set, multi-disc set from Arrow. This is a follow-up to a set we reviewed not that long ago from a Japanese director who worked in all sorts of genres for I believe it was Nakatsu Studio in the early 60s into the 70s. He's best known for movies Tokyo Drifter and Branded to Kill, which have been released multiple times on video here. I think Criterion has them out now. That's probably how you would find them. And this is, thank you. There's no clips. So I'll just start talking about it. I'm leading up to a big reveal. It's right there. Seijun Suzuki, The Early Years, Volume 2, and there's a subtitle that I don't remember. So the first Seijun Suzuki set were all these youth-related films that he did in the early 60s in Japan that were about young people making their way in the world, and it was a variety of genres and color and black and white, and that was cool. I didn't realize, you say the early years, Volume 1 and Volume 2, so I assumed these would be later films, and then I realized, these are split up by overall genre or overall theme. So these go back, and these could be interspersed chronologically with the ones in the first set. So I'm going to read the titles, and forgive me while I look away because I don't remember them all. You have like 5 movies on this set, and then extras. One film has a commentary by a historian. There's a Japanese film historian who basically gives you an overview of Suzuki's career. General overview, but mostly just about specific films here. And then you get like trailers for all the movies. So there is, again, context for where do these movies come from. Now, according to one of the extras I learned, none of these have ever been released on video in this country, period. I don't believe any were released theatrically in this country, and these had never been released on video in Japan. Like they've never been on disc in Japan, let's say. So these are like worldwide video premieres here. So I really like these a lot. This is a guy who, I'm trying to think of an American director you'd liken him to, and I don't know about old studio directors well enough because his style wasn't so crazed that you'd be like, oh, that's a Suzuki movie. But he just made like really solid films in various genres. So I'll give you a quick rundown of these. A movie called 8 Hours of Terror, I really liked. Group of people on a train can't continue from point A to point B, they need to take a bus. Well, the only bus they can take is this old rickety bus that goes through this crazy, treacherous mountain pass, and everybody needs to get from point A to point B. So this is very reminiscent of a movie called The Wayward Bus, based on a Steinbeck novel that's a British film I saw recently, which is the same thing. Strangers thrown together on a bus going from point A to point B and the various dramas that occur. Now, in this story, it's a mountain pass where if you take a wrong turn, you're plummeting to your death. So it reminded me of Wages of Sin to a degree with that too. And then you have a prisoner on the bus, and then you have bad guys who try to hijack the bus. So there's little dramas here and there. All the while, like, this is a mountain road that, a stiff rain is going to wipe these people out. So it was a really good melodrama. The cinematography was great. It was shot pretty much entirely out of doors in the wild. And you do get these things where they have, like Sorcerer or Wages of Fear, where they have to cross a bridge that is held together with spit and tape. And you're like, they're all going to die. So I really like that a lot. The Sleeping Beast Within, I don't remember what that movie was about. I have notes, but it would be really unprofessional to look at them, wouldn't it? Smashing the O-Line was a film about two rival reporters trying to, it's this thing I've noticed over the years in films. Sometimes movies posit newspaper reporters essentially as cops. I'm like, shouldn't the police be doing this? So it's like these reporters going undercover trying to bust a drug ring in Japan. So a lot of this is shot out on the docks. And now what I love about these movies overall is it really, to me, they feel like they're really giving you a good sense of what life was like in Japan in the time they were made. They're shot on location, actual interiors, not a lot of studio set work. So Smashing the O-Line is about two rival newspaper reporters who are trying to, bust up a drug ring, and one goes to more extremes and maybe lets his line of ethics blur a lot more than the other one. So it's like a battle between the two guys. Tokyo Nights was very interesting. A young man who is the heir to a syndicate. His father's head of the syndicate, and he dies. So this young guy who's in like high school in America comes back and has to take over this mob family, basically. And he's good at everything, so he goes to his school, and every club wants him on their team. So the chess club wants him, and the music club wants him, and the fencing club wants him, and he sort of does a little of all of them. And at one point, a rival gang is trying to, teach him a lesson, and you see all of those clubs defending this kid with what they're good at. So the boxing club is beating these guys up, and then the fencing team comes in, and they're fighting with him, and it was kind of funny.
Really looking forward to what the chess club was doing.
And the chess club is like, we have a great strategy you could use.
Right, there you go.
So this movie, it was a mix of comedy and drama, a little bit more toward melodrama, which these kind of go back and forth. Melodrama is overall what they are. My favorite was Man with a Shotgun. This movie is about a man.
He's not a hobo, is he?
No,
Okay,
that would be later. Unofficial sequel, in-name only sequel. Man with a Shotgun is this guy who shows up in a logging village in the mountains of Japan with a shotgun, the titular shotgun, and it's the kind of movie Robert Mitchum would have made in the 50s.
Okay.
He's a badass, he knows how to use his gun, he knows how to use his fists, and it's a very sort of corrupt little world that's going on there with this logging company that just hires.
So a drifter good guy who wanders into town to
It's kind of
right
like
or
a
wrong?
spaghetti
Okay.
western,
Okay.
and he's there for a reason that you learn later, and it's nice seeing a guy clean house, basically. There's a lot of corruption and a lot of bad guys, and they hire, like tough guys to work there and stuff, and it's him being the one guy who's the white horse guy who rides in and tries to take care of it all. Shot in color, shot in scope, so it's super widescreen. Wow. Gorgeous. Just these shots of the rugged Japanese landscape that you don't usually see in a movie, in these like logging villages and waterfalls and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I liked all of these movies to various degrees, but they're movies I never would have seen otherwise. I'm glad I did see. I don't know that they're movies I would necessarily, with a shotgun I would probably watch again. But it's a film history that people don't know. Like, these movies were never released here, and you think of other countries and you think, their films are super representative of their culture, which is so different from ours. These movies easily could have been made here, for the most part. Everything speaks to the same kind of things that go on in movies here. It's about cops, about newspaper reporters, about the mob, all that kind of stuff, and about people on a bus. And what's more American than people on a bus?
There you go.
God. So I really like this set a lot. I recommend it very highly. Anybody who's curious. I know Arrow sets are not inexpensive, but the quality is amazing. The packaging is amazing. And if you're like a film historian or a film student, or like me, you're hungry to see stuff you've never seen before, this delivers in a big way. I really recommend the Suzuki sets pretty highly.
I know one thing that could arguably be more American than People on a Bus.
What?
Opening day at Wrigley Field. Go Cubs. So
when is that?
Today.
Today?
It's over now. What were you folks doing while we were watching it? It's 2 o'clock right now. They're on in 20 minutes. I got to go.
Who are they playing?
Pittsburgh.
Oh, I like Pittsburgh. I'm going to be there in 2 weeks. Being that I do not care about sports whatsoever, I will give all of my fandom energy to you, and I wish you the goodwill of a Super Bowl win for your team.
Thanks.
Or whatever they win. The Cup?
I don't know. The World Series.
Anyway, there's a smattering of applause. So next week you can come back and you'll either be holding a pennant or you'll be like, I don't know.
Something like that.
Chicago what? I don't know.
There's not a lot to talk about next week. So.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what's
Don't
coming
look forward to next week, but what, you're telling me 2 weeks from now is Infinity Wars? Something like that?
It is earlier in
Get
April.
in line now?
Yes. It's funny, I saw a trailer for Infinity War on TV, a TV ad, and it was all Black Panther. Because Black Panther is still doing so well.
Absolutely.
They're just pushing like, by the way, Black Panther's in this movie. Nobody else. So until next week, I am Mark.
And I am Tom.
And we are
the Cinemaniacs.
Cinemaniacs.